Hello, everyone. Today we're in the middle of absolute nowhere, driving to Ohio when we read that our Steam in the Valley excursion with 765 was canceled. We've already driven an hour past Altoona, and with nothing else to do, we decided to head to Pittsburgh. Our first stop is right next to the National Aviary. In a random park in Philly is the Trench. The nickname it came from the literal trench dug through the middle of the park so the Pennsylvania Railroad 4-track main line could pass through. This line that now stretches from Chicago to New Jersey is still used as NS 61R passes through. After a long, cold 20 minutes of nothing but squirrels staring at me, I heard the distant rumble of locomotives and got ready for the next train that would come. This train ended up being NS 594 Shire Oaks to Baltimore, Ohio coal train. With heavy coal in tow, these engines were really roaring as they made their way through downtown Pittsburgh. As I stood next to the train, my ears absolutely dying from the screeching wheels, I heard another, louder sound in the distance. This was the sound of two NS-MT-78s I had to get to the DPUs. Then we headed to St. Anthony's Basilica, which has the largest collection of relics outside of the Vatican. Since this is mostly a train channel, I'll skip over some of it. After that, we heard the 5:30 train was still running. So, we headed to our hotel before eventually going to see 765. Just after getting into Ohio, we passed a familiar town and was jump scared by a caboose right after. The next thing of note was these 3 rail cars sitting in Lima, Ohio. For all of you not initiated for steam engines, Lima, Ohio is the old home of the Lima Locomotive Works, who built many steam engines. The last thing we would see on our drive was the Wheeling and Lake Erie Yard in Akron, Ohio. There were 3 high hoods and an Operation Lifesaver. But topping all of these was a water tender, which I don't know what it came from. If anyone knows, please let me know. After dropping off all our stuff at the hotel, we arrived at the Rockside Station of the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. This is where 765 would load her passengers before continuing down to Indigo Lake. Speaking of 765, not long after we got there, she arrived. As we left, we saw the flooding that canceled our and the first train. The reason we left is so we could beat 765 to Brecksville, Ohio, where they would be doing the run-bys. This is where they let all the passengers off and run by the engine at almost full speed. Well, full track speed at least. Once all the passengers got off, 765 reversed for the first run by. Just as quickly as she left, she came charging back, her whistle echoing through the valley. When 765 came to a stop, the diesel on the other end pulled forward, this locomotive being an Alco FA. Then we got right up next to the station to see 765 flying by. Then we headed to the tiny town of Everett, Ohio to see 765. For a long time before she arrived, we could hear her whistle echoing in the background. While we're waiting, I might as well tell you about the engine pulling the train. The engine we have here today is Nickel Plate Road number 765. She is
Actually, it's a Baldwin 284 S3 class Berkshire type steam locomotive.
You are wrong. It's actually a Lima Locomotive Works S3 class Berkshire. And when I say Lima Locomotive Works, I do mean the same Lima that we passed through earlier. The Berkshire class is different than most other locomotives that either have more than or equal to the number of trailing wheels. 765 is now owned by the Fort Wayne Historical Society, where she runs excursions such as this one. With the distant whistle getting louder and louder, we knew it wouldn't be very long until 765 broke the relative silence of the small town. After the stop near the Canal Bow station, we headed back to Breckville to see the next run-by. When we got there, 765's safety valve had popped and wouldn't stop. After running back past the bridge, 765 came charging through the morning light. With lights at full blast and ditch lights on, 765 and the diesel reversed back across the crossing. headed down to this random gravel pull-off in the middle of nowhere to see 765 flying through the fields of Ohio. Once 765 had passed us, we decided to chase her, and that's just what we did. Once 765 arrived in Indigo Lake, we left. As we were driving down the road, we saw the red of coaches, and were able to see 765 one last time. You may be asking, where do we head next? Well, we headed to Lordstown, Ohio to see the train graveyard. It took us a while to actually find the graveyard, but once we did, all we could really see was this above the bridge. As we headed all around it to try to find a way in, a CSX local blocked our path. There's a CSX rail yard right next to the graveyard, and they were switching a bunch of auto wrecks, blocking our path. Eventually, though, they got out of our way and we were able to continue on. After almost 20 minutes of searching, we finally found a way to see it. First up was a line of leaser locomotives, including some locomotives that still need a bit of repair. Off in the distance, we could see a line of switchers, and in the very, very back, an SW8 switcher and a Santa Fe locomotive. While there are many, many rare locomotives here, there was only a few we were looking for, these being the large collection of GP30 locomotives that are stored here. GP30s also happen to be my favorite engine. Oh look, an SW1! Switchers aside, we headed into more of the yard to see what we could see. Okay, seriously, they gotta run on a switcher sometime. And there's the end. There's one, or a couple cabs of one. Remember how I said I wanted to see a GP30? Well, not a decapitated one. It still is a GP30, so we drove over to get a closer look.
Southern Pacific, roll on, roll on. My baby's on the way. And when she get in, man, I can't tell you.
After spotting something behind this Guilford engine, I got very excited. Sitting right there is CSX 2211, a GP30 road slug, exactly what I was looking for. And there was more, and more, and more of them, scattered all over the yard were all the GP30s I could want. After one more look at them, we passed the Guilford engine and decided to head out. Oh, and we went to get a better look at the Santa Fe engine. And then one last stop in Ohio, a place that some of you may recognize. And ironically enough, right next to the tracks is a Norfolk Southern building. After sitting for almost an hour with no trains, my mom, who was with me on this trip, said,
"We gotta get a train at some point."
And literally 2 seconds after she said that, we heard the horn of NS 23G. Once that had passed, we headed to the Steel City once again before going to Gallitzin, Pennsylvania. This is home of the aptly named Gallitzin Tunnels.
Your destination.
They have an ex-Pennsylvania Railroad caboose that sits right next to the tunnels on the main line of the Norfolk Southern. From very far away, we could hear the rumble of engines that we soon found out was NS-36A. We watched it past the crescent camera and we were anticipating it coming here in about 5 minutes. But then, just our luck for the entire week, it stopped. And not just a quick stop, it went into full emergency. I genuinely have zero idea why it stopped, but what are you gonna do? After that failure, we decided to skip the horseshoe curve and head straight to NS's Altoona shops. At least we'd see some engines there. And to delight all the foamers out there, we saw not one, not two, high hood interruption, but 3 NS Whiteface -9. There was also an Operation Lifesaver Jeep and a bunch of ex-BNSF KCS units that I didn't get a video of for some reason. Nearing Harrisburg, we saw one last intermodal, and next to the Rockville Bridge, we saw the lights of a manifest. That's all the footage I have, and thanks for watching. Now go away.